Hey everyone, welcome to the Real Clear Politics Takeaway for Tuesday, March 23rd. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP.
And I'm Carl Cannon, Washington bureau chief for Real Clear Politics. Tom, we've been watching basketball this week, and the University of Colorado, my alma mater, played last night, and they seemed a little listless at the beginning, and we found out why later. They had been told about this horrific shooting at a supermarket in Boulder, and I'm not blaming them. They lost. I'm not blaming that. They lost to a fine team, but I mean, they were affected, and I think everybody's affected. You know, we want to come out of this pandemic and have some normalcy, but mass shootings, we've had several of them now, are not the kind of normalcy we're looking for.
Yeah, the second one in 2 weeks with multiple fatalities, and obviously a terrible story, Carl. We don't know much of anything about the shooter or his motivations, and so there's a lot more to this story that we'll find out in the coming days. But let's talk about the new poll that we have up on the site from Real Clear Opinion Research, which you wrote a story summarizing the results. Carl, give our viewers a quick recap of what we found in our latest poll.
Well, the story, you can find on our front page, is 2,000 words long, so I'm going to have to be
more succinct than that, for sure,
this morning. Look, what it shows you, if you're looking at all these numbers, is that what Joe Biden has done in making the stimulus, this huge stimulus package, the priority, and the secondary, the 1-2 punch of the stimulus and ramping up the vaccines, it's what Americans were looking for. These are popular policies and, much more popular with Democrats and Republicans because that's the world we're in. But Republicans, if the details of what's in this COVID package, 1.9 trillion, and you and I have talked about it, a lot of it is got nothing to do with COVID relief. But the pollsters, kind of walk people through it. And the more people know about it, the more they like it. And that's especially true of Republicans. So this is a popular thing. And in a larger way, looking at it, what it suggests to me at this moment in our history, people are looking to the government again for help. They're, the old line of Ronald Reagan's in this present crisis, he said in his 1981 inaugural address, government isn't the solution, government is the problem. That's been flipped on its head. 40 years later, people think that government can be the solution, and they're looking to an activist federal government. And so, in a way, Joe Biden is meeting the moment. I think that's what our poll shows. You read it. What do you think?
Well, yeah, and we saw this after the 2008 financial crisis. The public turns toward government, expects relief solutions, and certainly that seems to be the mood of the country right now. One interesting thing, Carl, as we talk about this, you mentioned getting COVID under control was the number one issue for Americans, of most importance to them. Number two was ramping up the vaccines. Number three, and again, partisan-wise, more Republicans than Democrats, but the number three issue there was getting control of the border crisis. And we saw pictures released yesterday, the first ones from inside these facilities on the Texas border that show these migrants, they're jammed in there, they're wrapped in these, foil blankets. This is an ongoing issue for the administration. They're not willing to call it a crisis. They say they've got everything under control, but everything suggests that is not true, Carl. How long is this going to be an issue for the Biden administration, and will it take a dent out of the high ratings that he's received thus far?
Well, the poll. Our pollsters, Jonathan Chavez and John Della Volpe, listed 17 issues in our survey and asked people to rank how high, what they were high. And this, COVID relief and the shots in the arm were 1, 2. But the third issue was the crisis at the border. And the Biden administration may not want to call it a crisis, but it is one, and the American people know it. And what was so interesting about that, Tom, is that more than any other issue, there was no partisan divide. Republicans, Democrats, independents, all were about 70% rating this as an important crisis and something that needs to be dealt with. And in terms of look, Republicans and Democrats are not focused on the same aspect of it necessarily. But what that poll suggests is that the answer to your question is this is going to be an issue as long as it's an issue. And the government, the administration is going to have to figure out a way to address it.
And certainly it's going to be a topic of discussion at Biden's first solo press conference, which is going to take place later this week. Carl, you covered the White House for 15 years. George W. Bush, Bill Clinton. What's the question that you would ask Joe Biden if you were sitting at this press conference on Thursday?
Well, I think it's the one you just said, Tom. I mean, there's an art to that, and it's sometimes looks like a lost art, but other people ask questions. You're not supposed to ask your question that has already been answered. If the president says something dumb or interesting, you're supposed to follow that question. That's not always done either. But depending on the order of these questions, but what I'd want to know is, what's your plan? What's the short-term solution to the flood of migrants coming in? What's the long-term solution? And how can America be the place we want it to be without simply announcing that we're not going to have a border at all? Because, even people who say we have an open border, they don't really mean that. I mean, we can take a few thousand people a day. We can't take, if 500 million people wanted to come here, nobody be in favor of that. So I would try and draw out the president to talk about how he sees immigration policy, not just in how he'd solve the short-term crisis, and long-term, how he sees the problem and how he sees the issue of immigration.
All right. Well, we will see what happens. We'll leave it there. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of Real Clear Politics.
And I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief for Real Clear. And this has been the RCP Takeaway for Tuesday, March 23rd, 2021.